introduction. How about a great round of applause for Tommy Thompson? I'll be mentioning every time I'm in the state. Tommy's like an incredible guy. I don't know if you all understand what he's done for our country, but he was the 4-term governor of Wisconsin, which is just remarkable. When I was first elected governor, I called Haley Barbour, and Haley was the governor of Mississippi. I said, he was governor for 2 terms. He said, Haley, do you miss being governor? He goes, anybody who wants to be governor more than 2 terms has got something wrong with him. That says about you, Tommy. But, and he also, of course, was in the cabinet and did an incredible job in Health and Human Services. This is, see, there's some people that I've known in my lifetime that I believe that they're so special that sometimes they're gone before we get to really appreciate who they are. And there's a friend of mine, his name is Michael Novak. He's a Catholic theologian. I consider him to be like the modern C.S. Lewis of our time. And I just love to talk to Michael and spend time with him. There are other people like that, but Tommy fits into that category. I mean, he is so smart. I just said to him, what do you think about the FDA? We have to fix the Food and Drug Administration. What do you think? Without even blinking, he gives me 4 talking points. You see, Tommy is a visionary. That's what you have to understand about him. He's a visionary. Frankly, Tommy, they want me to drop out. If you'll get in, I'll drop out and support you for president. Okay? No, he is a visionary. He sees things. His mind is working very fast. And frankly, what goes through my mind is I got to have all my folks working on policy call him because his mind is working. And where did I see a thing? If you don't think differently, there's so many great. Have you been looking up here? Huh? I don't see it now, but there was one about if you keep doing what you did in the past, it won't work. You need to be with change. I'm a change agent. Tommy's a change agent. I think that, Tommy, that's why we get along. We're always thinking about the next thing we need to do. But we do it in a responsible way. I mean, I don't want to just destroy. See, we're not really establishment people. We work with the establishment, but we don't take orders from anybody. Tommy never has. I never have. And so, Tommy, we talked about when I was a congressman. I tell you, I was elected. Let me give you a little story. My father carried mail on his back. His father was a coal miner. My mother's mother could barely speak English. My mother was the only one of the family to get out of the 8th grade and get a high school diploma. I come from a blue-collar Democrat town. I never met a Republican, really, until I went to college, or maybe I went to some meeting somewhere. But this was a town where they're like, see these guys sitting back here? They get up in the morning and they just praying their job's going to exist tomorrow. Am I right, guys? They're worried. They're nervous about their future. Nervous about, their benefits, their 401k, I would imagine they have here. So I grew up in a town where it was like that. People were very nervous about losing their jobs, and they're really always worried about their kids. But we had peace. We had peace because, frankly, we loved one another. And the neighborhood and the community would pull for one another. But we saw dips, ups and downs. And if you go back to the town where I grew up with, you went back there today, it's a very, very tough place. Very tough. Poverty, broken down. But, so what? You can't be held down if you want to lift yourself up. That's the beauty of America. That's what my mother and father always taught me. So all of my lifetime, the reason I got into politics was basically to change the world. Now, you may say that's a political thing. No, it's not for me. It's not for Tommy. I got into politics to try to change things and basically to speak up for people who usually don't get represented very well. Because a lot of times in politics, the rich and the powerful are the ones that get their way. And that's never really mattered to me because I figure they can always take care of themselves. But these guys that are back here, they're the ones that I'm concerned about. What's going to happen to their family? How about their kids and all that? I first ran for office. Oh no, I got to go. Where's Doug? Is Doug in here? Or is he moving around? So I go to Ohio State. Tommy, you've never heard this story. I go to Ohio State. And because I wanted to get out of this little town, okay? So I go there, and I find myself in a dormitory that is 23 floors high, and I have 15 college roommates. They stuffed everyone into this little sardine can, and it was difficult because the university was so big, so much bureaucracy, and I was there, and I loved being there, but in a short time I became frustrated. So I called the president of the university's office and asked for a meeting. And they didn't really want to give me a meeting right away. And I said, well, we're going to have a meeting because we're just going to have one. That's what my mother taught me. So they finally let me in. So I go see the president of the university, and I get all dressed up. I put on my blue jeans and blue jean shirt and necktie and go in to see him. And he says, and I walk in, he's very impressive, beautiful office, beautiful carpeting and furniture and all that. And he says, what's on your mind, young man? So I tell him. And I looked at him and I said, sir, I've been in school about a month now, maybe 2 months, and I'm undecided at Ohio State as to what I want to be, but looking at this office and the lighting and the furniture and the desks and all this, maybe this is the job for me. So he tells me about his responsibilities, his fundraising responsibilities and his academic responsibilities, and he says, tomorrow I'm going to fly to Washington and have a meeting with President Nixon because I'm friendly with him and I have some things to talk to him about. And I said, well, sir, there's a number of things that I would like to talk to him about also. Could I just go with you? And he said, no. And I said, if I write a letter, would you give it to the President of the United States? And now here's a lesson for the young people here. He said, I guess I could do that. So if you don't ask, they can't say no, okay? So he says, yeah, I can do that. So I went back to my dorm and I wrote a letter to the President of the United States, basically inviting myself to the White House for a meeting, and signed it sincerely, John Kasich, P.S. You know, I'm a college student. I got time. I can come and see you. So a couple weeks later, I go down to my mailbox, and there is a letter from the office of the President. I open it up, and I go upstairs to my dorm room, and I call home. And my mother answers the phone, and I said, Mom, I'm going to need an airline ticket. The President of the United States would like to have a meeting with me in the Oval Office. And my mother is shouting, honey, pick up the phone. There's something really wrong with Johnny. True story. Now think about this. I'm gone for like 2 months, and I'm telling my mother I got to go to Washington, the White House. Her sister and 2 brothers didn't graduate from the 8th grade. My father's carrying mail, and his father was a coal miner. Their kid's gone for 2 months, so you wonder what they're thinking, right? So they actually go get me an airline ticket, and I fly down to Washington, and I go through the White House security, and I'm sitting right outside the Oval Office on a little bench, and a guy walks up to me and says, "You're going to get 5 minutes alone with the President of the United States." Senator, what do you think? I'm 18 years old, a first quarter. You think? I'll tell you what I'm thinking. I've got a new jacket, new shirt, new tie, new pants. I didn't come here for 5 lousy minutes. So they opened up the door, and the president greeted me, and I greeted him. And to make a long story short, I spent 20 minutes alone in the Oval Office as an 18-year-old first quarter freshman. I spent 18 years in Congress, and if you add up all the time I spent in the Oval Office, I peaked out at the age of 18 and should have moved to La Crosse. So this has been my whole lifetime. So when I was 24 years old, I was working in the legislature and got that job on a fluke, and then I said, I'm going to run. So I quit my job, and I ran for the state Senate. And it was a very tough campaign, and I was elected. I was the youngest person ever elected to the Ohio Senate. There were only 33 of us in the state. So I made a couple promises when I ran. I said, number one, I think we should have a part-time legislature, which I think all legislatures ought to be. And secondly, I didn't think we should have a pay raise because of that. And thirdly, I was never going to support any tax increases because I thought there was too much waste in the government because I actually worked there and knew what they did with the money. So I get elected. So first 2 years, I'm in the minority. And in the third year, we win the majority, the Republicans. So the first thing they want to do is pass a pay raise. So I vote no. And they go, oh, well, we know you're going to vote no. I said, well, but I'm not even taking the money. And I turned the money down for 2 years. And then I learned that people thought I was nuts because I turned the money down. I probably should have taken it. But that was the first thing that aggravated everybody. And then the second thing is they had a plan to raise taxes. The Republicans. So they came to me, and this one guy was yelling at me in my office. I said, I'll tell you what. Why don't we just go down in the parking lot? I've got some gloves in the car, and let's just fight right down there and get this resolved. And he left because he was afraid. And so I offered my first budget, Tommy. And we had to close at that time, as I recall, it was like a $400 million gap. Now, I'm working on trillions now. You think $400 million intimidated me? So I wrote a proposal to balance the budget without a tax increase, which lost. But that was the beginning of it. And that's when I learned that if you're the budget chairman, you can actually know how to run the country. You know everything that's going on, which is why I wanted to get on the budget committee. And I also knew that if we have those numbers, guys in the back, see that 19 trillion? When people look at that, business people, because you make your money selling structural steel, people don't want to take on big projects when the money's out of control because they don't know what's going to happen. So I always felt that if we could get those numbers not only stabilized but coming down, that we would see economic growth. And that's exactly what happened in Washington when I was chairman, and Tommy was one of the people that came down, Governor Thompson, and helped us. And because of him, we reformed welfare, we saved money. And he had a lot of other ideas, and we were able to act. I mean, think about it. At the end of the last century, which seems like the end of the last century, it was only like 16 years ago, and the beginning of this one, 15 years ago, the economy was going crazy. There wasn't any discussion about wage problems or income inequality because the country was zooming. There's only three things you need to have a successful economy. Common sense regulation so we don't break these people. Number two, you got to have taxes that are lower, particularly on these business people. And thirdly, you got to have that thing can't keep going up. And when you do that, you get economic growth. Now we have to train people. Workforce is important these days, more than it's ever been. So anyway, all this time I've been doing these things, it's because we were working against the establishment, but we got it done. And Tommy didn't mention, beyond all these incredible things that I did in Washington and in Ohio, he forgot I was also a huge television star on Fox News. How could you leave that out, Tommy, huh? I mean, come on. But the other thing I want to tell you about is I also spent 18 years on the Armed Services Committee. And, you know, it's really amazing to me. When I went to Congress, I was 30 years old. I was like one of the youngest in America. I mean, can you believe? I mean, I can't even believe when I think about how fortunate I've been in this lifetime. The good Lord has definitely blessed me or put me in a position to do some things. They didn't have any committee assignment for me. And finally, they made a deal. Bob Michael and Tip O'Neill made a deal to create 2 extra spots on the Armed Services Committee. And I remember getting on this committee. This is the committee that decides all the allocation of resources to build a defense. And I remember getting on the committee, and I announced it to my local newspaper, and the guy who was the writer said, well, why would we even care about that? Isn't it ironic that today, one of the biggest things that we need in a commander-in-chief is experience in the world of international affairs and defense and national security. So I was on that committee. And I'm going to tell you that because we're all watching Brussels. Now, some people say what we ought to do is we should just ban all Muslims from coming into the country. Okay, I don't know how you do that. I mean, do you ask somebody when they're coming in, are you Catholic or are you Muslim? I mean, how do you do that? Then the second thing is, if you think about it, you know, the overwhelming, I mean, like the infinitesimal numbers of Muslims in this world, how do you think they feel about what happened in Brussels or in Paris? How do you think they feel yesterday when they blew up all those women and children over in Pakistan? How do you think that the most Muslims feel about that? You ever think about that? They think it's as horrible as we think it is. And so you have this tiny percentage of people who are in that community who are radicalized. Now we need to destroy them, right? Now let me ask you a question. If we know we need to destroy them and we know they live in a neighborhood with other people who happen to be Muslims, how do you think we're going to find out who the bad actors are if we don't have a relationship with